Thank you, Lascia and Corla, for the discussion on this really important local issue, but one which also has relevance for schools across the country. The news last night that the early intervention class in Kilbrittain National School will not close is so welcome. I can't emphasise that enough. It's down to the dedicated parents and staff who understand the value of early intervention ASD classes, essential classes for children aged 3 to 5. However, this case also reveals a very worrying dimension to special needs education. Firstly, the entire situation in Kilbrittain was of the National Council for Special Education's making. They closed the class, leading to additional stress for parents, disruption to school life, as well as taking up time that the principal and staff could otherwise have spent with students. It's now clear that the NCSE can, without engagement, just remove a vital service. The need for the class was never in doubt. In Kilbrittain, the school already had the staff in place and the space and students enrolled. Nonetheless, a vital service for children with additional needs can be removed just like that. If the NCSE had engaged with the school in the first place, all of this would have been avoided. And secondly, Minister, and most worryingly, unfortunately it appears that Kilbrittain is not an isolated case. Indications from the NCSE reveal an agenda to potentially phase out early intervention classes in favour of the access and inclusion model, AIM. AIM is a really welcome development, but it cannot in any way replace early intervention classes. The NCSE have repeatedly refused to clarify whether or not this is their policy. For the most part, they've just ignored the question, but when they were pressed in a public meeting, they said they didn't want to comment and that they're waiting on the finding of an AIM report. That would, of course, lead us to worry or believe that this is being seriously considered and, most worryingly, already decided, that they're potentially prejudging the findings of that report, with Kilbrittain being the threat of the first casualty. So, Minister, would you assure us that they will not be phased out in replace of the AIM model, and explain why the NCSE does not engage with schools before making decisions like that?
I would like to thank both deputies for raising this issue, as it does give me the opportunity to outline the current position regarding provision for children with special educational needs, including autism. Enabling children with special education needs to receive an education appropriate to their needs is an ongoing priority for this government. This year, the Department of Education will invest in excess of €2 billion, or over 25% of the department's budget, in the area of special education needs support. As a result, the numbers of special education teachers, special needs assistants and special class and school places are at unprecedented levels. Since 2011, the number of special classes in mainstream schools has increased from 548 to a current total of 2,148 for the 2021-2022 school year. Of these, almost 1,900 special classes cater for children or students with autism. Recognising some of the difficulties experienced by parents in securing appropriate school placements throughout 2020 and 2021, my department and the National Council for Special Education have worked closely on a more streamlined and joined-up planning process, which has ensured a targeted approach to meet demand for special needs placements ahead of each new school year. I am satisfied that this approach is delivering. This intensive intervention has seen an additional 300 special classes, providing 1,800 new places already opened nationwide for the 2021-22 school year. The Department recognises that where parents have difficulties in securing an appropriate school placement for their child, particularly a child with additional needs, it can most certainly be a stressful experience. The Department is working hard to ensure that there are sufficient school places appropriate to the needs of all children available on a timely basis nationwide. Specifically in relation to Cork, there is currently a network of 357 special classes, of which 309 are special classes for children with autism. Of the 309 special classes for children with autism, 228 are at primary level, including 21 early intervention classes, and 81 are at post-primary level. A total of 45 new special classes have been established in Cork for the 21-22 school year. It is important also to point out that the Early Childhood Care and Education, or the ECHE programme, provides up to 2 years of preschool within the eligible age range without charge. The Access and Inclusion Model, introduced in 2016, enables the full inclusion and meaningful participation of children with disabilities and additional needs in the ECHE programme. The goal of AIM is to create a more inclusive environment in preschool so all children, regardless of ability, can benefit from quality early learning and care. The model achieves this by providing universal supports to preschool settings and targeted supports which focus on the needs of the individual child. A diagnosis of autism is not required to access AIM supports. However, preschool children with a diagnosis are generally supported in mainstream preschools with additional supports provided through AIM where required. The NCSE sanctions the establishment of special classes, including ASD early intervention classes, where there is an identified need. I understand that on occasion early intervention classes are redesigned as school-age special classes to reflect the changing age profile of students. Kilbrittain National School currently has an enrolment of 205 students. The school, in conjunction with the NCSE, agreed that while the class would open an early intervention class, it would redesignate as a primary school special class in September 22 to meet the projected demand for places in the area. It was further noted that the class would cater for the children enrolled in the early intervention class should they continue to require a special class place for their primary education. On the 10th of February last, the school engaged with the NCSE regarding the emerging need for the retention of the early intervention class in the school and requested that the class be retained. The NCSE has now reviewed the matter and approval has been given to the school for the retention of the early intervention class for 22-23. In addition, a new special class is being opened by the school to cater for children transitioning from this year's early intervention class. This decision was taken following consideration of the needs of the area and the capacity of the school to make the additional provision.
Thanks, Minister, and I do appreciate that there's overall more resources being put into special education, but unless that results in on-the-ground supports, it's meaningless. And I suppose the larger point remains. The decisions are being made by the NCSE are on behalf of schools and not with them. And we all know that staff and parents are the experts in local conditions and the needs of children, and they should be at the centre of the process, or at least a part of it, and currently they are not. So I'm just going to ask the questions again, if that's okay, Minister. Are you going to commit to changing that? And then secondly, is there a move from the NCSE and the Department of Education to phase out early intervention classes in favour of the AIMS model? Is that the report that is underway at the moment? Because that hasn't been answered. Like, when I put in questions myself to the Department of the NCSE, I don't get a reply. When the Disability Committee does, we still haven't gotten a reply. The only time there's actually a response is when the media put in the question, and then they just avoid answering that particular question and reference Kilbrittain on its own, which is really important. But what people need to know is this a national policy? Are they prejudging the finding of an AIMS report when they decided to close down Kilbrittain? Because you're saying it's based on need in an area. How could that have happened in Kilbrittain when there were students enrolled, staff in place and accommodation there for the following year? It doesn't actually make any sense. And this is a reality that parents are experiencing.
We're way over time.
Sorry.
And thank you to both deputies, and appreciate you raising the issue, because it is important to put on record the commitment of this government to special education. And I think it is worth noting that 25% of our budget, as I've outlined earlier, is now dedicated to special education, and rightly so. And that's a budget of €2 billion. And I think it's also important to note that considerable progress has been made in the last number of years in terms of the provision of special education classes. In fact, we can very clearly say that Budget 2022 provided for the creation of 287 additional special classes for the 2022-23 school year. And these additional classes will provide over 1,700 new places. And that means that for the 22-23 school year, there will be a provision of 2,435 special classes, which is significant progress in a short period of time. And I would also acknowledge most sincerely that further work needs to be done. But specifically in relation to the early intervention and the provision of same, I want to be very clear that the request from the school was received by the department on the 10th of February. The acknowledgement from the school that it was their view that there was an appropriate opportunity for the early intervention class to continue. And on the 1st of March, it was communicated that the early intervention class would continue in the school, that it would be retained, and equally so that provision would be made for a new special class to be opened by the school to cater for children transitioning from this year's early intervention class. I think that speaks volumes about the proactive nature and the determination and the recognition of where there is a need, early intervention classes will be put in place, and where there is a need also for children to progress from the early intervention class, that will also be catered for. And I think that's important. We must have a focus on children not being put just into classes, but having a facility to progress to meet their needs going forward, and that has been provided for. Just very quickly, I just want to say in relation to the SNA provision, we have a record allocation of SNAs at 19,000 in this country, 1,000 been added in the last budget and 1,000 in the previous budget, and we will continue to grow that provision.
I'm really sorry to do this, but we've 10 minutes left for a 12-minute slot, so we're going to be in trouble. 10 minutes left for a 12-minute slot.